Welcome to the Freeze Dried, guys. I'm Michael Taylor, and I'm here with Colt Crisp. And today we have a special guest. We have Sean Jones from Foodynamics. And let's start this off. Sean, first off, thank you for joining us on the Freeze Dried, guys. We're really excited to have you on the show today.
Sean, we've been looking forward to hearing your story. So let's kick things off with an origin story. What inspired you to start Food Dynamics, and what was your vision when you launched the company?
Sure. And I think it's sometimes interesting to people to know that we kind of started the freeze drying company by accident or by chance. And we actually, in 2016, I was chief operating officer for a large healthcare company, and really didn't love my job. And 3 of our 4 kids were getting married within 18 months of each other, and we wanted to come back home to Wisconsin. And we figured we'd open a little pet store, and the worst case scenario is my wife is a retired teacher and she'd run the store and I'd have to get a job or do some consulting or something. And so far I haven't had to get a job. It's been just over 9 years. And we had a couple Harvest Right freeze dryers in the back room. So we were freeze drying organ meat and basically stuff from the grocery store down the way from us. And we were selling it to our customers, and everyone just absolutely loved them. And fast forward just a few months, we had a couple of the pet brands that we carried, their owners came in and said, "Hey, could you do some research and development for us?" Because, most freeze-dried companies have minimum orders, and certainly it's very expensive to do research and development. So we said, of course, because I'm a science geek at heart. And we did just that, and then we started actually making it for them. So we went from basically 1 dryer to as many as 30. So, and that's what I mean when I said it happened by accident. We've always had that commitment to taking real whole foods and freeze drying and feeding a species and biologically appropriate diet to cats and dogs. And of course, my grandchildren love freeze dried apples and strawberries.
There you go.
And so for years, we expanded our pet stores. So we went from 1 to 2 stores pretty quickly. And then we started making freeze-dried treats for other pet stores. And then that turned into a few other companies, and it was really hard to keep up with the harvest rights.
Mhm.
And, we made that decision who we wanted to be at that time. And did we want to just stay and do what we were doing? Our pet stores do really well. We're actually going to have our first franchise pet store open in a month or 2. So, it was a really serious contemplation of, what we wanted to do. And we started talking to Jared at Parker Freeze Dried. And we also traveled to like two other companies to see how their freeze dryers were built and understand the science behind them. And I have to say, we think we made a very educated decision on, why we chose Parker. But there's other great freeze drying companies out there. And we just love their customer service and the assistance that they give us and continue to give us. So in 2023, we received our first, it was a Parker 6, so it has the capability of freeze drying 1,500 pounds or more at a time.
Wow.
And one of the things that we had to back into understanding of it. It's a very versatile machine in that, in a harvest right, it would take us at least 2 days to freeze dry anything, especially for organs and meats. And we went down to, and for some proteins, less than a day in the Parker. So we literally increased our capacity overnight from the 30 or so freeze dryers to increased our capacity by 1,500%. So we're producing probably around 30,000 pounds of product a month now.
Very
And
cool.
we service 150 customers, big and small. And we're at almost 100% capacity right now, and we're looking to expand. So,
Wow, very cool. You had kind of touched on this, but when you were first starting out, what freeze dryers were you using? I think you said the Harvest Right.
correct.
We know a lot of people began with the Harvest Right machines. What led you to choose those when you first got into the game?
It's a good question, and mostly it was it was the cheapest, and they're residential machines. And again, I'm quite the science geek, and was very, very interested in freeze drying. And we actually, our What's in the Bowl Pet Shop is the name of our pet store. We actually became a Harvest Right dealer.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had, maybe more support than you would if you were just buying them and either running them resident, as a residential unit or even using them as a business.
Mm-hmm.
So we had lots of parts on hand, and for the most part, our team can, fully dissect an entire machine outside of some of the refrigeration components, but
Mm-hmm.
we could replace just about all the components that would need to be fixed. But we chose it because of the price, and I think a lot of people do that. I mean, we could talk about looking back what we would have done differently, but that's why we chose that machine. And I know there's a lot of, like any product, there's a lot of criticism about machines and things like that. But for us, it served us really well. And then, some of the challenges I think that people have with them are probably valid challenges. But I can tell you that the challenges that we've had with anything mechanical pale in a comparison to the other challenges you have as an entrepreneur. So
Yeah,
it could be expected.
absolutely.
So, fast forward today, you built Food Dynamics into a national brand. For all the small freeze dried businesses out there listening, what advice do you have for those wanting to scale to the national level? What's the biggest lesson?
So there's probably not one single lesson. I can tell you the lesson that I'm presently learning is we have been undercapitalized since the beginning. Again, I indicated that we originally went with the harvest rights because of the price, and then we took that, which was a huge leap. We're still 100% family owned.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have any debt until we brought on our first industrial freeze dryer through Parker Freeze Dry, which has been a great experience. But we've also bootstrapped everything as much as possible. We're cleaning out drains, digging drains. We bought used refrigeration components, so we literally stripped them out of a grocery store that was remodeling and reconstructed them in our facility. Other than our freeze dryer and our leased dishwasher, everything in our facility is used. So we bought them at auctions. We bought it secondhand, and which is great for a startup, right? We're the epitome or the perfect example of bootstrapping a startup.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, we also been very undercapitalized, and that I think our expansion would be tenfold if we had more financial backing. And other than that loan that we have on the freeze dryer itself, we could probably right now use a couple $1 million, and we could scale our business 50-fold. Our cost of sales, so basically our I would say our advertising, our cost of sales and marketing is less than 1% of our entire revenue. So we don't have trouble acquiring customers. Our difficulty is being able to fulfill the orders. So, I mean, that right now is our biggest challenge. There's been a trillion other challenges along the way. But I think you really have, and this would be true for probably any startup company. You want to make sure that you have enough cash on hand at all times, but also that you're properly capitalized.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Well, let's shift gears here a bit. What does a typical day at Food Dynamics look like in terms of production and operations? I'm sure it's a well-oiled machine by now, right?
It's getting there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a day to day, and we have a great team of people, and we could go back into all those challenges, and that it wasn't always the case. We started out with a really, really strong team, and because we were a startup, and we weren't able to really retain a lot of people, mostly because the job market the way it is now is really, really competitive. So we had our times when it was really difficult to get the right people in place. And what we've done is really found people that are passionate about our mission for freeze drying pet food. And we also have opportunities to be in the human market right now. And our food safety standards would meet that. But right now, day to day it's anything from, talking to customers, fulfilling orders. One of our greatest challenges now is be able to project what we're going to need, 2 or 3 months from now. So now, because it's becoming more of a oiled machine, we our production schedule is 2 or 3 months ahead of time. So we want to make sure that you have enough freeze-dried beef liver in stock. And we also sometimes have to hedge our costs for raw materials in order to be competitive in the market. So there's a lot of strategy that goes into just the daily planning. You know, you can imagine the turkey prices go up just before, a couple months before Thanksgiving. But you also don't want to fill your freezer up with stuff when you get a good price, because you're always limited with freezer space. And, right now, for a while we had 16,000 pounds of ground lamb in our freezer and didn't really have the customer demand for it. We just got a good price on it. So we made a lot of mistakes that way. So it's all these little things that you have to learn either along the way or have really good business mentors. And I think that's what's so awesome about this podcast is that you have these great experiences that you're sharing with everyone, and that's really important. And I would say, everyone needs to listen that's interested in freeze drying, because you may get one tidbit from me, but you'll have, Jared on from Parker Freeze Dry, and until, somebody's like, oh, wow, I'm glad I know that, because that could have cost me a lot of money down the road. So day to day is really, it's sourcing, it's talking to customers, it's acquiring customers, it's planning trade shows. We've gone to trade shows every year, been very successful there. This is the first year we're not going to the Global Pet Expo, which is one of the world's largest trade shows. At least, well, we're going, but we're not exhibiting because we're near capacity. One of the things too is now we're having to worry about all the OSHA standards. We just hired 2 new really awesome people. They both have forklift experience, but now in order to meet OSHA, they have to be trained specifically on our equipment. We're always having equipment maintenance problems. Our dicer is down right now. We're waiting eagerly, looking out the window all the time, waiting for FedEx to drop off this one part so we can get our dicer up and running. And then right now we're having to contract with someone to do our dicing for us while we're waiting for that one part. So there's all those little things that just come with running a business. And that's why I always say, if you kind of complain about maintenance on one type of equipment, or, things break down. Everything's going to break down. There's not one thing in our facility that we don't do regular maintenance on, that we don't, on our books figure it's depreciating as need to be fixed at some point. And with Parker, for example, they're really good at predicting how long the longevity of some of their wear and tear parts are going to last, and why you need to have a regular maintenance schedule. But they can say, you know what, at 4 years and 10 months, you better start recording the vibrations, because they can predict, what's going on with that pump. So there's all those little things that go on a day to day. And my biggest fear, the things that keep me up at night are, what are the things that we're not doing that's not on, not on a sheet of paper or on my calendar to attend to. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And my staff will always pester me for freeze-dried ice cream or pineapple or something. And it's like, we really got to get those duck heads in there today.
Yeah, put some Skittles around the duck heads. There you go.
So when it comes to equipment today, you said you're using the Parker machine. What influenced your decision to upgrade from the harvest right units?
The initial decision was 100% capacity and wanting to expand our business. If it's like one of those decisions, we went with the Parker 6. We considered the smaller, the Summit wasn't available yet when we ordered our machine. It's available now. In retrospect, given the scale, we had 30 of those machines, and we would have bought a Parker Summit machine in a second. Even if, knowing and getting to know Parker, if the commercial unit or the extra large unit had been available when we started through Harvest Right, we would have still chose the Parker machine, because first of all, it freeze dries twice as fast and is not going to have any of the maintenance issues or customer service issues. Let's say something broke on that machine. Chances are I'm going to have that part shipped to me within 24 hours. And a local mechanical company could install it. So that was a big difference. When you're in business, you can't wait weeks to have your machine fixed, or you can't even wait a day of being on, waiting to talk to someone on technical support.
Yeah.
So the heaviest decision, and we created a formal request for proposal. So we had a 10-page Excel sheet of all the things that we wanted and needed for our future business. And Parker literally checked every single box, and there were a lot of other good machines that we looked at. But having the customer service, having them nearby, made in the United States, was very, very heavy for us. So we know we chose the right company. If I could go back even 2.5 years, if I could go back 9 years when we started, definitely if the Summit was available, we would have went right to that. If I could go back to even 2.5 years ago, we probably would have done the Parker 10R versus the 6 that we have, because we got to capacity so quickly.
Mhm.
We have enough business now that it's probably about a 4 month or 6 month leeway, or it's going to take, if we ordered a 10R today, it might take 4 to 6 months to get one today. It took us 9 months to get our 6 kind of during the pandemic. We probably should have gone bigger. And that's really been our theme since we started our first store in 2016, because we were so focused on price constraints and saving money. We should have always gone bigger. We should have done bigger stores. We should have done a bigger facility. Our first facility for freeze drying was 3,000 square feet. We're at 14,000 square feet right now. We finally made that decision to move into a space. Now it's kind of like, right now it's too big until we get our second freeze dryer. But we're really, the mistakes that we made have been not realizing how fast we were going to be able to scale. And that's just a testament to the freeze drying business. It's in the pet industry, it's the fastest growing category. I think on the human side, it's ready to explode once people really understand what freeze drying is. Everyone knows astronaut ice cream, or they like freeze dried strawberries and apples. But once they figure out all the benefits of what freeze drying brings, I think we're right on the cusp of the beginning of the consumer being aware of what freeze drying is and the advantages of it.
Oh, totally. The one thing that you kind of touched on is there's going into business. Most businesses start with the same concept like a personal finance would do. You don't want to be in debt. You don't want to max out your credit cards. You want to be able to, pay off your house, pay off your truck, pay off your car, but most successful businesses, they leverage their debt successfully, and debt is an asset as a business owner. And so that is one of the hardest things as business owners, and most business owners that I talk to, is understanding that debt can be a good thing, especially in their startup. And you talked on, I mean, you hit the nail on the head when you said that, we should have went with the 10R, but, for, price constraints and stuff like that, we chose, the 6. And that's a perfect example of, hitting your capacity. And then it's like, well, now what? Now we need another machine, or now we need another thing. So now we're going to have to bring on more debt to be able to, you know, have our business grow with our production needs. So it's a very valid point that you had brought up. And I think a lot of businesses need to be able to understand how to leverage their debt successfully instead of just bringing on a ton of debt and going out of business. But
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
And
Um,
your point to debt too is, along with that, you feel a lot more comfortable about the debt if you have a really strong business plan.
yeah,
So it
absolutely.
all goes together, and of course, if you get a SBA loan or something like that, you're going to be required to do all those. So I would
Mhm.
always say, if you're worried about the debt, make sure that you're spending all your efforts in your business planning, so you know how you're going to repay that debt payment. and
Absolutely.
and everybody has their anxieties about starting a business, but you have to know how you're going to repay that ahead of time. and what you need to do.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And then again too, it's you didn't know your business was going to scale as fast as it did too when you were making those decisions. So
No,
it's always that gamble as an entrepreneur. It's very stressful and there's a lot of anxiety when it comes to that. So, but I've every single business owner I know, and I talked to a logging company. I talked to an owner of a successful logging company once, and I go, what's the first thing or what's the biggest thing that you should have done at your startup? And he goes, brought on more debt. So, you
yeah,
know,
and
um,
we did it, but
mhm,
now because we didn't bring on enough,
mhm,
so we're making our payments on our machine,
yep,
and we still have 3 years left on that machine.
mhm,
The challenge now is we need to bring on, more, probably 150% more debt.
mhm,
And now we have two payments.
yeah,
We would have got a lot farther had we just had that bigger chunk and the bigger machine.
yeah.
So, and hindsight's 2020.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
it always
but
is.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, you had mentioned that you were a Harvest Right retailer. I was too at one point. Yeah, and that's one thing that I would always mention to customers when they would call me, because they're thinking about starting a candy business. And they're like, "Well, I'm thinking about getting a medium." And it's like, well, how much candy do you plan on selling? Let's look at the numbers
right,
here. Let's crunch it down. Do you want to make a bigger investment on the front side so that way you can hit your capacity needs on the back side, instead of getting forced to buy two mediums, 2 months from now, let's look at the XL. So
right.
absolutely.
And
We've always seen,
we,
somebody, oh, sorry, we've always seen people, in the groups where they, buy a medium machine for home use and then immediately say, well, I could have a little business. And all of a sudden it's now we're ordering two larges or XLs or,
Mhm.
and then that medium is all of a sudden just, it looks so minuscule and, almost pointless to own when, you start getting into business and you realize, oh man, that one was, that's not volume at all.
Yeah.
and and it's funny, my wife is, to this day, is always concerned about how much I share about the details of our business operations, whether it's proprietary or not. And the answer I always have is like, I'll share anything you want. The difference between me and most other people is we do stuff. We'll do it. We'll execute on it. We'll make it happen. So, doing it is what makes the difference. But
Absolutely.
I always say, if you're worried, especially if you're talking about harvest rights, if you're worried about the difference between, $1,000 in a machine or $2,000, that that's not really good thinking if you want to start a business, because it would figure, how long would it take you to make, $2,000 working at the local gas station.
Yeah.
Those are, if you're really going to start a business, you have to at least be serious about it and
Mhm.
take some risk.
Absolutely.
And it's, a couple $1,000 investment is not a huge risk to, unless you're going to make, I think Kevin O'Leary on Shark Tank always says you could make hundreds of dollars on this.
Well, you know what? Scaling isn't easy. What were the biggest challenges you faced when expanding your production capacity? And are there any growing pains that stick out to you?
I mean, size of the facility became a huge issue because everyone knows how much heat those Harvest Right freeze dryers put out. Um, I can honestly say we went from 30 machines, if they were all running, to one big giant machine that runs on three-phase 480 volts. And I think that machine, because of the way it's vented outside, puts off less heat than all those machines. So just the size of the facility we needed for those little machines, didn't really justify needing. We didn't need that much that space.
Mm.
We spent. It sounds silly. We had to spend $17,000 on an air conditioning unit
Wow.
because it was so hot. I would have rather spent that on a freeze dryer or a
Mhm.
forklift or something. So all those scaling issues were linked to thinking too small, and now we're, maybe the scaling issues were just the opposite. We're scaled to have 4 Parker 10R units in our facility, and we have 1 Parker 6. So now it's just the opposite. It's like hey, we've got this really expensive facility, and just keeping the lights on in the areas that we don't necessarily need right now sometimes becomes challenging. Um, we have no doubt that we're going to be able to use the full capacity of this facility. We just have to figure out how to get fund another industrial unit, because I can guarantee, and a lot of people with scaling they have a lot of concerns about sales. And I have to say, in the freeze drying industry, probably shouldn't be at the top of your list as how you're going to make your sales. Because in freeze drying, like I said, we spend less than 1% of our total revenue on sales and marketing. And we go to really expensive trade shows that, they might cost us $20,000 to go to a trade show. That hasn't been a challenge. And for other freeze drying companies that, we talked to almost everybody who's, oh yeah, we're near capacity too. So our big challenge is, right now is funding that next step, which I actually thought was going to be a little easier than it is, because in my previous career, I've seen venture capitalists and investors invest in really dumb things in comparison. So, and we've seen also, there are a lot of companies out there that are not good stewards of investment money, and that's not us. We're do-it-yourselfers. We'll do everything to be good stewards of investment money, but there's a lot of companies out there that ruin it for us.
Yeah, that ties into, there's always room to innovate, and whether it's machines or whether it's product.
Right.
In one of my episodes, I had worked with one of my former clients, who's actually still a client for my tent and marketing business. Anyways, I had somebody locally that sells at Disney that had a product that he was curious if I could do a hybrid freeze dried candy that's deep fried and freeze dried. And I made it work, and I shipped off the idea to my friend who could actually meet scale and uniformity, because I couldn't with my little facility. And man, we made a killer product. And the concept behind it was, because it's a deep fried, it was a churro bite, but because it's deep fried, it's going to retain some of that oil, which will give it that liquidy
Yeah.
taste. But it's going to have the crispness of a freeze dried, churro. And oh my goodness, it turned out great, So, I mean, little things, in this industry, there's so many rooms, there's so much room still to innovate,
Absolutely.
with pet food, with candy, with food, or machines in general. Colt and I, we've been talking and helping and working with a company called Defreeze, and they're coming out with a really fantastic machine. They're based up in Canada, and some of the things that they got on the horizon is just, so we're really excited to see the level of innovation that's going to come into this industry. So it's great to hear from the a manufacturer that they're like you were saying, we're looking for the next thing that we can
Right.
onto here. So
And I do think we're just at the beginning of freeze dried
absolutely.
technology. I mean, it's been around for, my understanding is it's been around for centuries actually,
Mhm.
but the technology, and I think now they can start incorporating AI into, some of our profiles. Yesterday I cut 2 hours off of our bison liver run by learning more about the ramping between the heat and vacuum, instead of doing it gradually, doing it more extreme. So we're just kind of learning all these little things, and part of it is it's not linked into our freeze dryer, although it probably could be done, but we're just taking our profiles and running them through ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing. It's your point about innovation.
Hmm.
It's the beginning. We make freeze dried donuts for dogs, so it's chicken and either cranberries or blueberries.
Hmm.
And we actually were just messing around one night in the harvest rights at our store, and we thought, most freeze dried pet food is pretty boring looking.
Hmm.
And we thought, well, what if it looked more like the pastries of some of the other stuff we sell in our store? So we just took chicken breast, which is real bright,
Hmm.
and threw in a couple cranberries and freeze dried it. And they look fantastic.
Hmm.
And I figured, you know what though? There's 2 ounces, 3 ounces of chicken breast in here. We're gonna have to retail these for $6.99. And I didn't think they'd sell in my own store. And I was wrong.
Yeah.
We sold 40,000 donuts last year.
Wow. Wow. Good for
Um,
you.
so those are all, to your point, is there's all these little things that haven't happened yet.
Hmm.
We look, there's this company, guys should probably talk to them, Alaska Food up in Alaska.
I just emailed them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to try those breakup bites that they make so bad.
Hmm.
And they don't sell them online yet. But you see, put oatmeal in anything, I'll eat it. But oatmeal and banana and strawberry and apple together.
Yeah.
So I made some myself and they
Hmm.
turned out awesome.
Nice. Nice.
We're not
Yeah.
on the human side, but yeah,
Yeah.
there's so many things going on.
Hmm. Absolutely.
We got a request to freeze dry waterlogged paper from North Carolina.
That, yes, yes. I mean, I just saw something about document restoration
Yep.
for freeze drying. I mean, they even have things like bodies for like animals, cadavers and stuff like that for preservation. I mean, that everything is just things you would never even think of are popping up. Yeah.
So, speaking of things that most people don't think of, just fun fact, most people don't know that 95% of all vaccinations are freeze dried. So,
Yeah.
people don't realize this technology is being widely used in the world, and it's in
Right.
a laboratory somewhere. It's in this big facility, and nobody really understands it yet, but it's getting out there very quickly.
Hmm.
We visited a freeze dryer manufacturer in Hudson, New York. Tom Fink that owns that, and they make freeze dryers for the pharmaceutical industry. And we were just kind of chatting about how those freeze dryers are configured. They say, well, yeah, that freeze dryer there, that's a couple $1 million, but they'll have $100 million of pharmaceuticals inside of it. Um, so yeah, freeze drying is like I said, I think the consumer needs to know what freeze drying is. I would imagine that 99% of consumers don't know the difference between dehydrated and freeze dried still.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Righty. So, along those lines, are there any misconceptions about freeze-dried food that you'd like to clear up? Something you find yourself educating people on a lot?
One of the things that, and I've even on, and some of the freeze drying groups on Facebook have gotten like pretty aggressive responses to this. So just because something is freeze dried doesn't necessarily mean it's shelf stable yet. And we test every single cart that comes out of our freeze dryer. We test for water activity, it's really nothing to do with moisture. It's about the cellular amount of water that exists in the product. And the sensors are, I mean, you can buy one on Amazon for like $300, but commercial one's probably more like 12,000. But one of the things I worry about the industry is someone's going to be selling candy or they're going to be selling freeze dried apples somewhere, and just because they break it open and it feels dry, and a lot of these groups will say, "Oh, you just weigh it before and afterwards, and you can determine whether it's been freeze dried," and that's absolutely not true. You really have to test for that water activity if you're on the commercial side. So the misconception, especially with some of those smaller machines, is you know if you run the cycle, there's sensors in there that are going to determine what the moisture content is, and that's absolutely not true. It's not even true on the industrial machines. So you do have to test that water activity. And one of the fears this is one of the things I have in the pet industry too, is someone eats something freeze dried and then they get really sick or die, and what damage will that do to the industry?
Yeah.
Especially if it was something that, yeah, we tested for moisture and it was fine, but someone still, you know, they were still harmed by it because there was still some sort of bacteria able to grow in there. And there's certain water activity, it's usually like a point, uh, you know, uh, 0.06 or actually zero point 0.6, a water activity level that pathogens can't grow in there. Nothing can grow in there. And then we also sometimes worry about other pathogens because it's such a good preservation method that it probably preserves pathogens perfectly well as well.
Mhm.
So, and I think there's food safety standards really have to be followed, especially if you're freeze drying raw products like we are. If you're freeze drying, some sort of meals with lettuce in it, you're basically preserving that E. coli or salmonella that could be present in there perfectly. and that's going to get rehydrated. I mean, I guess the good thing is it's probably going to get rehydrated in their stomach, and there's enough acid to kill it. But so I think those are just some of the misconceptions that we get, is that you can just freeze dry anything and not have to worry about it. And I hope that nothing like that happens to tarnish the industry.
Yeah. The that's one of my hangups with the massive acceleration of people buying these home machines is they're putting stuff away for 20 years. And 20 years from now, we're going to start learning about somebody
Right.
that ripped open a pack of stew, rehydrated it, and it was rancid or something wrong. They start getting sick or something like that. So food safety is I've always, when I did my YouTube channels or when I had classes, when I was teaching people to do harvest rights or how to use their harvest rights, that was one of my biggest things is like, this is a cool machine and all, but what you're doing with it is life or death, and, if you're unsure about something, add some more dry time, or find a way to test for water, activity in the actual product itself, but to just pull, like you're saying, to just pull something out and, oh, it's crispy, you
Yeah.
know, okay, it's crispy, cool,
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
And we, it's interesting. We really follow like all the recalls that happen in the pet industry and in the food industry. And what we were so surprised to learn is that a good portion of some of the recalls didn't happen during the food production process. It happened in their packaging area.
mhm,
Because a lot of those machines they use for packaging aren't 100% wash down. And so I guess I would probably learn this from working in food facilities when I was a kid. But, if you're, in that cottage injury industry kind of scares me sometimes because you, you know, you, most people don't clean their kitchens as well as they should. And when you're doing mass quantities of things, and it's a whole different ball game. So food safety is probably something that I hope even Harvest Right starts to focus a little bit more on.
mhm,
And I think the neat thing about most of the people that are freeze drying for a business, they're so excited about it. I think they'll absorb that information ferociously.
yeah, absolutely,
They don't want to be liable either.
for sure. Switching gears again, let's talk leadership. What leadership principles have guided you in running and scaling Food Dynamics, and what is your approach to leading your team?
So I, I'll probably say something kind of unexpected here. Having a long career in different industries, my first goal when we did this was to make this company the company that I never got to work for. And what I mean by that is how you treat people. And, we don't have a lot of depth financially right now, but we try to exchange that for, being a very family oriented, flexible organization. We've really hired based on, kind of these two principles. The first one for me is we want to hire people that are going to have a passion for what we're doing. And also, and I think secondly, at least when I hire somebody, I really hire for aptitude. I want to I hire them based on how someone thinks versus what we have to teach them. Because in freeze drying, there's not going to be a ton of people, and we're in Wisconsin, so it's like the freeze drying mecca here. I think there's more freeze drying companies in Wisconsin than almost any other state, but for what we pay and the expertise that it demands. So our leadership has really been to have that really, close family relationship. It's come back and bite us a little bit. We've had a few employees that, we really need a HR policy for this now. And my daughter, either luckily or unluckily, is actually a corporate attorney for a Fortune 500 company, and she works in the HR department, and she scares the heck out of me. But but we've had to come up with some of those policies and everything, attendance policies, and now safety policies. I just earlier today got done meeting with our insurance company who provides free OSHA consultation. So we're very much about food safety and the safety of our employees. Again, we don't have this financial depth, but I'll buy steel or composite toed, shoes for anybody that works here. I got certified as a forklift instructor. I hadn't driven really a forklift since I was in college. And then when we got a forklift, it was kind of like, well, it's kind of like riding a bike, right? But we didn't like any of the companies that came in to do the training for our employees. So we really want to, and long ago, I always believed that we should actually treat our employees better than we would even our customers, because they're the ones that in the end are going to take care of the customers. Yeah. So that's kind of our guiding principles. And I do hope that our company one day becomes one of those companies that would say, it's like, this is a great place to work. And here's why, because there's flexibility. I am a hypocrite when it comes to work-life balance myself, but every day when I get up, it's like a game to me. It's running business, being an entrepreneur is recreation for me. So I can say without, and I hope some of our employees can say this, that without cliche, my worst day doing this is better than the best day of any job I've ever had. So one day I want to be able to not only have people feel like that when they come to work here, but also be able to pay them appropriately as well.
Yeah.
Strategic partnerships can be a game changer in this space. What role have partnerships played in the success of Foodynamics? Any collaborations that have helped you take things to the next level?
Absolutely. And the first thing that comes to mind is our relationship with Parker Freeze Dried, and Jared and Matt and Nick at Parker have been just amazing. And, one of the things that I told our team is, because they raved. We actually did a video testimonial for Parker for them. But what I told my team is, because they were feeling special, it's like, boy, they really like us. And I'm like, they like us, but I'm just telling you, this is the type of organization that provides world-class customer service. And when I say world-class customer service, we've all been in a hotel, but if you go to a Ritz-Carlton, it's a whole nother experience. It's kind of like going to a local amusement park or carnival or festival and then going to Disney World. They are I wouldn't say you would even compare Parker to another freeze drying company or equipment manufacturing company. It's that level of service that you're like, that literally makes you go, aha, or like, oh, wow, I wasn't expecting you to do or say that, or pride us with that level of support. Milkify, a company out in Houston, when they did a video testimonial for Parker, and they said, how many large organizations like this can you pick up the phone and talk to Nick Parker? And it's like one of those things. And Nick is like so incredibly passionate about freeze drying technology that we'll go down into a deep rabbit hole with him. But he's the type of person that will forget more about freeze drying than I'll ever know. But so that the strategic partnership that we have with our manufacturer, they have an incentive. They want to sell us more machines. We want to grow enough to need more machines. But when I say strategic partnership, my worry about expanding or the future of my business, on my worry wall, Parker's not on there. They're not on there at all. I sometimes always worry about having them on this pedestal because they could fall down, right? But that is the one thing I'm 100% have confidence in, and they've even sent some customers our way. So that's one of the things. And I think our other strategic partnership has been some of the brands that we've worked with, especially in the beginning, where, we really didn't have enough business to sustain, actually make it into a significant business. One of the commitments that we have, not only are we going to treat our employees like family, but we don't have any minimum orders, which, from a business standpoint, is probably not a good idea. My favorite customer is one of the local deans from one of the technical colleges and his 13-year-old daughter that they started a little pet brand for. But our partnerships with some of our larger customers, we've helped them innovate products. There's been a few products that I have formulated that I have no desire to bring to market myself. Because I always tell people, I said, there's the manufacturing business and then there's the sales and marketing business. Those are completely different skill sets. And then we have a few customers that we're in the middle of developing a brand for them, and we're providing all the technical information and some of the inspiration for, how do you differentiate yourself in an industry where everybody's entering the freeze drying market right now. We recently took one of our customers to Hickston, Wisconsin, where we source salmon from, and it's the most amazing regenerative farm I've ever seen or even had a concept of understanding. But we took one of our customers to one of the farms that we source from, so they're able to tell that story with both the images and video and the story behind where the salmon is coming from and why it's important. So those types of strategic relationships have really served us well. Probably we dive so deep into the relationships with all of our customers that it especially a small customer that's like again a few $100s, but I've learned in one of my previous careers that you treat every customer the absolutely best you can, and because you never know who they're going to become. And I saw that when I was in healthcare, where someone they were spending $2,000 a month with us, and within a couple of years it was $1 billion in a year. That was healthcare, but you just never know who's going to hit it out of the park. We have some amazing customers that have left their corporate jobs to go into the pet industry, and we're going to help them as much as we can. Their revenue right now, but they worked for other companies that they scaled sales tens of millions of dollars for some of these other companies, and now they're doing it for themselves. So we really value those relationships, and I actually find that so exciting to work with someone. And so we're those relationships, especially with manufacturers and your major customers or stakeholders, is always really important.
Absolutely. It's always a win-win when you have a company that values your success, so that way they can sell you another unit or something like that to help them succeed as well. So,
Yep.
Absolutely. That makes total sense. Let's get into the numbers for a second. What's your approach to pricing strategy in an industry with such varying production costs? How do you stay competitive without sacrificing your quality?
That's a really good question, and it's a really important strategy for us. And it's very timely too, because yesterday I actually put together our first MAP policy, because we had one of our customers that was selling products way under what we would ever recommend they sell them for, but we really didn't have a policy. So this is Sean Jones's philosophy. I think from the industry perspective, I think it's really important not to underprice freeze-dried products and any food products in particular, for two obvious reasons. You have to create value in the industry. So if you start to, in the pet industry, for example, one of the things you can do in the pet industry is you can buy what's called rendered meat or 3D meat. So it's either stuff that was discarded in the human industry, it died on a farm, or it was diseased and euthanized because it was diseased. That is all allowed in the pet industry. I have no doubt that a lot of this poultry that was supposedly destroyed because of bird flu will find its way into the pet industry really cheaply. And the way we've discovered that, when we started, we didn't know. We were buying stuff, we thought we hit big time when we were buying 200 pounds of chicken breast from Sam's Club. One of our differentiators is almost everything that comes into our facility was literally supposed to be on a human plate at some time. So, and then a lot of our competitors, they're buying stuff at a quarter of the price that it cost us to source it. So strategically, we really believe in creating the value. Plus, you don't know what's going to happen with food prices. We haven't had to give you an idea how we priced our products. We haven't had any significant price increases for 3 years. 3 years ago, we were high, but now we have the volume to support not having to raise our prices, because our margins can still be pretty good because of our scale. So you really have to plan your for the future in your scaling, you have to plan for variations in the market price. Turkey can double in price in a year, and then it'll come back down. We haven't changed our turkey prices ever. So I think you really have to look forward. You have to know what your competitors' pricings are. I don't think you ever want to be the cheapest ever. I just had a discussion with one of our pet stores with their groomer. There's like, well, I want to be the cheapest. And I was like, this isn't the right place for you. You've been grooming for 10 years. You're a master groomer. You're going to be the most expensive one on the block. And you know what? You're going to be full. And you're going to make twice as much as your competitors. So it's just kind of a business principle that you have to decide who are you going to be, and then you back into your pricing. So it's like, okay, I want to compete. I want my freeze-dried prices to be similar to this one. Work backwards and figure out how you can hit that price versus then struggling to compete with someone else's price. I can tell you in the pet industry and in the human industry, because we private label, more than 90% of what we do is private label. We can have products next to each other on a shelf, and one of them is 25% less than the other one. It's the identical product. It has the same lot code on it. And, consumers don't know that. And then the premium one is selling more.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not saying anyone's getting super rich. I can just guarantee you the person that's selling it for less is not making anything. They're thinking you're going to trade that for volume. And one of the other things is everyone thinks that, in order to do business with one of those big box stores, you have to have this, incredible margin. And that's probably not true because, we've worked with some of these big box club stores and their margin isn't what you think it is. So I would say decide where you want to sell, what price range you want to sell, and then figure out how you can hit it and still make your own margin. I would say anyone in the freeze drying industry, if you're not doubling your cost at all times or better, don't do it. You got to at least double it every single time. We have products that the ones that we double our price on, I consider those loss leaders because at the end, by the time that gets in someone's hands, that has to be your minimum markup. There should be products that you're marking up 200 or 300% of your cost. If the market, it's like economics 101. If you can sell it for that price, that's what you sell it for. If you can't sell it for that price and you're not going to be able to at least double your money, don't do it.
Yeah.
That's my opinion, but
no, totally. That makes sense. I know in the service industry, say you're a carpenter or, you frame houses, if you're priced so low, you're going to get to the point where you have just this massive amount of business that you can't support with your business.
right.
So if you double your price, you're going to, lessen the load on your business, but you're still going to make the same amount of money. So do you want to work twice as hard to make as much as you do for, raising your prices to accommodate your value in the industry? Yeah. And yeah, that's a perfect example of what you were saying.
And if you're the lowest price, do people really think you're the best one to do the job?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want a budget airplane or do you want, a solid built airplane?
Right. Right. And, it's the same thing with food or freeze-dried products. It's like, and in the pet industry, it's definitely different than on the human side because for whatever reason, you have this cat or dog or what other companion animal you might have that lives in your home that greets you at the door every night that you might very likely might sleep with at night. And then in the pet industry, majority of pet owners go out and look for the cheapest food. The number one selling pet food on the market is Pedigree at Walmart. It's really not good for you probably even to hold in the palm of your hand. And it's an interesting industry. And again, to be able to cater to that, there's probably no freeze-dried product that's going to be able to cater to that customer. But I can tell you, owning pet stores, one of the things is people will come into our store and we just start having a consultative type relationship with them. And all we do is share the love of dogs with them, and then we get them to think a little bit. And I always say, even the worst physician on the planet would tell the three of us and everyone in your audience to eat more real whole foods and less processed foods. And for whatever reason in the pet industry, probably 2/3 of vets today recommend that cats and dogs only eat processed food.
Wow.
It's just such a strange industry. But if you get people to think about it enough, we have someone that has a brand in a local market, kind of a high-end market. They have 11 stores. It's not as high-end as Whole Foods, but probably close. And they have demo reps that have gone into these stores, and they are killing it. They're just killing it because all they're doing is talking to people about the quality of the benefits of freeze drying and the quality of the sourcing that was used to make the product, and just killing it into the six figures. So it's amazing to me how you could have the identical item, and they call it A/B testing, right? You could have the identical item on a shelf at different prices with different marketing, and it's all about the sales. So
Yeah.
I can't say, I mean, that's a completely different skill set than being a manufacturer. And I know enough about it that I would only trust a professional with it, because that's not what I'm good at. That's not what I want to do.
All right, Colt.
For the listeners who are serious about freeze-dried food, for the listeners who are serious about building a freeze-dried food business, what freeze dryer would you recommend to them today? Would you still suggest starting with the Harvest Right, or is there something better for scaling?
So I just talked to a customer the end of last week, and they wanted to bring, and it was interesting because they're both scientists in the medical field. And they wanted us to freeze dry a supplement for them. And I told them, go buy a Harvest Dry freeze dryer and come up with your formula in your kitchen. And my wife's like, oh no, they're going to do it themselves. And I was like, they're not going to do it themselves. When they figure out, I mean, they're already professionals in their field. And I always say, you're making one product, and even once you hit any level of scale, that one product probably still isn't going to be enough for you to make a significant investment. So I would say there's nothing wrong with starting with a Harvest Right to prove your concept. Make your product, share it with your friends and family, run 100 batches and figure out if this is what kind of product you want to bring to market, especially if you are bootstrapping it. Because if you send it to me to try to develop that product, it's going to cost you more than it would cost you to buy a Harvest Right. And frankly, going into business and not being willing to tinker in your kitchen, you're not going to be a successful entrepreneur unless you have a formula, it works. Here, make this for me. So I would say there's nothing wrong with starting with a Harvest Right. If you're really going to scale a business, I probably wouldn't buy any of those machines. I think that Harvest Rights are the Parker Summit right now. A lot of people think there's some other freeze dryers on the market that are probably they're larger and more similar to the Harvest Right commercial units. And I would say, based on those technologies, if they tell you like how much, if I find it so interesting, it's like, you really want to know how many pounds of product you can freeze dry at a time. And then there's some companies out there, it's like, well, it can make, this much ice. And I'm like, it's not an ice machine. I mean, all products have a different amount of moisture in it, so you're going to have a different amount of ice. I want to know how many pounds I can put in there, and I hope however many pounds I put in there of whatever product, it can handle the amount of ice it's going to create. So we really, really love the idea of that, the Parker Summit, because for scaling, if you can spend $150,000 on a Parker Summit, and it sounds like a lot of money, but if you're in a serious business, that you got to be willing to put that level of skin in the game. The neatest thing about that Parker Summit is when you upgrade even to a 2-cart Parker or a 10-cart Parker, or they have the 16, the software is the same. So
Wonderful.
your learning curve, you don't have to change the learning curve. And, if we went from Parker to Cundon, it would be a huge learning curve for us, and our whole business process would change. So you have to, and that's not always the worst thing. If it's worth it. But I would say, as I said before, it's like don't skip on scaling. I mean, you have to be able to do 100 pounds at a time, and if you're really going to have a business, that Parker Summit's going to be able to do 100 pounds in 24 hours versus waiting 2 or 3 days for another machine to do it. I have no doubt someone would be kicking themselves after a while. It's like, hey, I got to wait 2.5 days before I get this batch done, and I have an order waiting. And just so you know, everything in our machine for the next 3 months is fully committed to. And I don't talk to many freeze drying companies where that's not the case.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. It's not just about, this machine can do 80 pounds. It's this machine can do 80 pounds in one 24-hour cycle compared to, well, yeah, this machine can do 80 pounds, but it takes 2 or 3 days. So basically you have a machine that'll do 17 pounds of food, compared to this one that'll do 80 in a 24-hour period. And so,
and when it breaks down, it can be fixed in a day or two.
Exactly. Yeah.
When it comes to designing these, having enough cold trap to be able to actually push the machine fast enough and to be able to process, like you said, in a different manner. People are generally like with these home type machines, you're seeing, 48 hours on strawberries, when we all know at an industrial scale, you can turn strawberries in 16, 18 hours in some machines.
Yeah.
So it's just vast differences in design. And just because you're looking at a home freeze dryer does not mean it operates anywhere near the same as like a Parker or anything like that.
No. And again, I think it's great to prove the concept. I mean, we had an inquiry from North Carolina. Someone wanted us to do restoration on, some document and some certificates. And I was like, well, I really can't put them in our, unless you have 1,500 pounds of paper, and I'd have to do nuclear cleaning in our facility if we did that. One of the first things I did is I took a whole bunch of stuff out of our recycling bin and, dumped it in the sink, and I threw a bunch of pages in the harvest right just to see how it came out. So it's a great proof of concept. And I would say that's really important. When I said I was messing around with kind of that same recipe that, the breakup bites from Alaska Food has, I did 3 different kind of mixtures between oatmeal and banana and some cinnamon and things like that. And I won't even care to admit how many harvest rights I have in my basement, but, I put different batches in each one, and, took it out, and I brought them here, and I put them on our conference room table, and I said, let me know which one you like the best.
Absolutely.
The one with brown sugar and cinnamon.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and since you've made the switch to different equipment, how has moving to a new freeze-dried system impacted your production efficiency and your bottom line?
I mean, it's nothing less than profound. That happened immediately, and we literally went to be able to produce in less than a week what took us a year to produce prior to it.
Wow.
It was a game changer, and we lined up the installation of our machine we had customers waiting, and I can tell you, we did I'll tell you these 2 stories. When we first opened our pet store, we had a customer that walked in. They wanted a bag of food that we didn't carry. I said, if you want to pay for it right now, I can deliver it to your house by tonight. And I went to another pet store and I bought that bag of food, and I did it just to acquire that customer. And we did almost the exact same thing with freeze drying. We had a partner in the area. We started to acquire customers, and we had product delivered to us. And I bought a refrigerated truck. I piled that stuff in there, and I took it to another freeze drying company. So we had a bulk of customers already ready to go. So we could generate that revenue as soon as we turn that machine on. So it was certainly a challenge, but again, if I probably wouldn't have done, if I had to do it over, I probably wouldn't have done that. But I had so much anxiety about this big, almost $16,000 a month payment for the freeze dryer that I was like, I need to have instant revenue from this thing. So we did whatever it took, but it was absolutely the right decision and the best thing we ever did. Um, our our challenge now, as I mentioned before, is we're really wanting to bring on a strategic investor. So we can, and I say strategic, and I've talked to some firms that's like I felt like I was going to sell my soul.
Mm-hmm.
Just a terrible feeling in the pit of your stomach. We really want someone that wants that sees our vision and sees our growth. We have no doubt that we could scale within 5 years to 20
Mm-hmm.
Parker 10Rs, and probably customer acquisition won't be our challenge along the way. It'll be how do we physically scale, and from a business aspect be able to scale that. That's just where the industry is right now. I don't know if that's where it'll be 7 years from now, but certainly it's the most, and there's Harvard used to call it a blue ocean opportunity, where there aren't a lot of competitors, not a lot of blood in the water yet.
Mm-hmm.
There's just, it's almost all opportunity.
Yeah.
So scaling, those are going to, I talked to a construction firm here. They said it might take 3 years if you had to build a building from scratch. And if you're lucky enough to find an existing warehouse, it's going to take a year and a half to retrofit it to build it out as a food facility. So those are all things that we're thinking about to scale. So those will be tremendous challenges. Those are, business challenges. So, that's aside from whether you're freeze drying or making widgets, right?
Yeah.
Those are just the challenges you have. But we absolutely love it. But it was absolutely the right thing to do. We have no regrets about it, other than, someone asked me in an entrepreneur group I was in on around New Year's Eve, and they said, "What's your goal for 2025?" And I was like, "Not to lose my house, because we want to expand."
Yeah.
And they're saying, "No, really, it has to be positive." I said, that'll be positive.
Yeah. Exactly. Cool.
Last question for you, Sean. What should buyers really watch out for when choosing a freeze dryer for their business? Any red flags or must-have features that they should pay attention to?
So the first thing is going to be, if something breaks on this, how long will it take to fix? The worst position that you can be in, especially when you're starting out and you have one unit like we do, is what happens if your revenue stream stops or is delayed. I think most businesses our size, they maybe have 30 days of cash on hand. So that's the number one thing. If this thing breaks, how long would it take to fix? If your whole livelihood is dependent on the consistency of this machine. And by the way, our machine, literally the only time it's down is when it's defrosting. That's the only time. It's running 24/7. If that cycle somehow lines up at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm here at 2 o'clock in the morning loading to myself. So you really want to make sure that machine can be up as much as possible. So if you are ordering machine and you don't have the money for a spare parts kit, that some of these machines, spare parts kits, 50 grand. They're, the nice thing about Parker in South Dakota, two things can happen. I can either be FedEx a part and probably have it in 24 or 48 hours. We live in Wisconsin. It's a 7-hour drive.
Mm-hmm.
I can leave at 2 a.m. and I can be back by the afternoon and meet the mechanical company to have that probably installed and back up and running. Knock on wood, we haven't had to do that. So I would say that is literally the biggest thing. And then the second thing is you have to feel comfortable with the technology and that you're going to be able to operate this. There are, I don't know, most people have had an experience where they were really into something and then, it was so complex, or there was such a learning curve that you kind of got defeated. And I can tell you, we just did it with our client relationship management software, our CRM. It's like, man, we're going to have to pay someone a lot of money to implement this for us, because there's no way we have the time or resources or knowledge to turn this thing on ourselves. With Parker, there's Parker University. They'll invite you up to the facility to see your unit and show you how your unit works. They'll spend a week with you when they install it. They're not going to leave. They're literally not going to leave until you can run that thing yourself. And it was very overwhelming. And I could tell you some of the things I worried about were, I mean, I discovered afterwards I didn't have to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
We were worried about silly things in comparison, and all Jared said was like, I wish you would have called me, or I wish one of your team members would have called me and tell me how worried Sean is about this, so we can, you got other stuff to worry about, believe me, but that's not one of them.
Yeah.
So there were all these things, and then there were a lot of things that, it's a huge project to be. I think one of the most important things about bringing a machine in is that your facility is ready to receive that machine, and so obviously it's a big machine, so it's delivered, and then you have to have a rigging company at least get it into place. Then there's an electrical team that's getting it in place. Then there's a mechanical company that's going to hook up everything. There's a big condenser that goes outside that has to be on a cement pad. There's all these things in the project, and Parker was like, "Here's your project plan."
Mm-hmm.
And then you got to figure out what are going to be, what's going to be complex. If you don't get anything like that, or if that's not available, or they're not able to answer those questions in a snap, that's not the right partner for you. I mean, unless there's plenty of these freeze drying companies I'm very envious of. They've built their own freeze dryers.
Mm-hmm.
I can't hang a picture on the wall. I can't hang two pictures on the wall and have them be level. That's not happening. So I'm very envious of someone with those talents to do that. So you really have to feel comfortable with this thing's going to work. And we've heard some horror stories from other companies of saying, you know what? They didn't even have the power brought to the building that was necessary to operate this thing. And it was months and months and months. I know part of the reason we ended up in our current facility is because in our last facility, it was going to cost $44,000 to bring the wire to the building from the energy company. And that didn't include the transformer or hooking anything up. This building we chose because it had the power requirements. And I can say, even though I had a engineering firm come here to confirm that it had the power that was reported to have, it still took 3 times the amount of time to get everything from the mechanical room to the freeze dryer, and cost 3 times what we thought it was going to be. The good news is our next freeze dryer, it's all right there. So all those things, kind of thinking them through, you have to have, confidence. And, Mike Tyson says you can have all the plans in the world until you get hit in the face, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of one of those things. You got to have a plan, and you have to, if you ever hear the words, don't worry about it, I'm worrying about it. Maybe they're not worried about it, but with Parker and a few of these other companies that we considered, they didn't care what we were worried about. They were going to take care of us. They were going to make sure we didn't have that worry, or they were going to give us the solution. Mm-hmm. If you're not, if you're worried about, what color it is and how it's going to look in pictures, if they minimize that, and that's important to you, that's not the right company for you. You gotta have a company that is going to attend to every concern you have, however silly it is.
That totally makes sense. And I find that with a lot of the people that we've interviewed that have had issues with their harvest right, is they didn't go into their business with a plan to accommodate breakdowns. They just assumed that, well, my harvest right, it's a fantastic machine. They're in every store. I'll just get one of those. And then, they had to ship their machine back. And 4 to 5 months later, they finally get their machine back from Harvest Right. So to be able to, if they would have, had a plan in place and said, okay, what are the major issues with these harvest rights? What parts should I acquire beforehand? What knowledge should I have before we go into business on how to fix these if there is an issue? Everybody wants to keep their warranty, but, from a business standpoint, I could care less about the warranty. I need that machine running. And
Right.
so if I got to bring in an HVAC guy to change out a condenser, you know, 3 times a month because of the machine, it might not be a prudent investment going with that model, but if that's what it takes to meet my production demand, I'm going to make my money back and then I'm getting something else. But still, having a plan in place for mechanical breakdowns is something I think a ton of people forget in their business strategy. So,
Anytime you're anything you have moving parts. I mean, this sounds really silly, but we have pallet jacks all over this place, and we have 2 broken ones, and it's disruptive to our business.
mhm.
I mean, it sounds silly,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to have the parts to fix those pallet jacks here.
Yeah.
And unless you can really plan that stuff out, your business is going to be hell otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah, we've seen people basically lose the business that they spent the last year building after, they've got 3, 4 machines and you've got 3 out of the 4 down. You can no longer hold contracts. You've got contracts coming in and you can't fulfill. And it's just really disheartening to see people lose out that way because they haven't planned correctly for, these circumstances.
And there's probably a business in that somewhere saying, the companies that are going to be devastated by the losses of machines. One of the things I was just at a pet expo and I met someone they were freeze drying pet food and treats just like we do in Harvest Right machines. And I sat down, I said, hey, what kind of machines are you using? And they said, we're using Harvest Rights. And I was like, hey, I've been there. I just love it. I think they've made beautiful stuff. Great company.
mm-hmm.
I gave him my card and I said, if you ever need increased capacity, we private label and any of your products and, you get a customer and they want 10 pounds of this,
Mm-hmm.
call me.
Mm-hmm.
You'll still make money. You'll still be able to acquire that customer or keep that customer. And I'll help you. And she wasn't real receptive because I knew it, you knew it, that
Yeah.
those machines are going to break down and they're going to
Mm-hmm.
be in trouble.
Absolutely.
And I was just like, I'm not going to make a ton of money making 10 pounds of something for somebody, but I probably have it on my shelf.
Mm-hmm.
I can just ship it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so interesting how, and I get it. We all have this intense personal, relationship with our businesses, but it's like, man, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
I don't, from my experience has been freeze dried candy is awesome because people across the country are finding out about freeze dried candy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care who the competitor is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And like we've mentioned on our show, there could be 2 or 3 different candy vendors at one little event, but each one's doing something different.
Yeah.
There's room to be competitive. It's, if you don't have the vision to go past, just the freeze dried Skittles, you're probably going to take a hit due to the competition. But if you're coming up with something creative that the other guy doesn't have or the other lady doesn't have, you know what? People are going to see that at your booth and be like, "Oh, wow, they got something new here," and so you got to have that level of innovation, and that's how it is with any business. Yeah.
I had mentioned those donuts that we made.
Mm-hmm.
Those have been ripped off by other companies now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's truly, I was like, well, they were bigger companies. And I was like, imitation is a good form of flattery.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sean, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thanks so much for sharing your journey and your insights. Is there anything else you'd like to mention or bring up before we leave here?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. And if anyone wanted to check us out, we're literally, we are Foodynamics, or more appropriately, Foodynamics, because it's Foodynamics with 1D.
Okay.
And part of the reason is Foodynamics.com was $14,000 and Foodynamics was $11. Yeah, an interesting thing. So everyone knows what a foodie is. And then in the Urban Dictionary, the word namics means doing something cool, but you would never do it yourself. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of why we do the private label. And we always say we really wanted to be Foodynamics, but everyone calls us Foodynamics because there's only 1D.
Awesome. What about a website or anything? How can people find you?
So it's www.foodynamics.com.
Okay, perfect.
We really appreciate you taking the time. We know a lot of free-dried entrepreneurs out there are going to benefit from hearing your story.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sean.
And we love sharing. We are entrepreneurs at spirit. And that's kind of the neat thing about our private label is we're helping people bring their brands to market. Mm-hmm. And I think I like doing that as much as I like doing the freeze drying.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you on. I just want to say thanks everybody for checking out Sean Jones from Foodynamics on the Freeze Guide, guys, and feel free to follow our podcast. We're on every single major streaming platform. Just search for the Freeze Dried Guys. And again, from Mykal and Colt, we really appreciate you having the time to talk with us today. And this has been really informational and been a great podcast. Thanks for joining.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Yep, you too.
See ya.